Live from London, this is BBC News. The conflict in the Middle East is intensifying, with Israeli ground troops now crossing into Lebanon. There's been large-scale damage in Tehran and Beirut as Israel launches a new wave of simultaneous strikes. The United States and Israel say they've destroyed the main command and control facilities in Tehran. Iran is continuing to retaliate. Explosions in Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, the UAE and Kuwait. The US Embassy in Saudi Arabia has also come under attack. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has warned the United States will intensify its airstrikes.
The hardest hits are yet to come from the US military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now.
Still stranded in the Gulf, there are limited flights resuming from Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but tens of thousands of passengers are yet unable to leave as much of the airspace remains closed. Germany and France have joined Greece, sending military support to Cyprus after the British airbase there came under drone attack. Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. Welcome to the programme. Israeli forces have begun a ground invasion of Lebanon. Israel's defence minister says troops have been authorised to cross the border and will advance into strategic defensive positions. At least 20 villages in southern Lebanon have been issued evacuation orders in areas close to Hezbollah operations. There's been further bombing of Hezbollah targets in South Beirut this morning. Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran, says it has launched rockets at 3 Israeli bases in response. The Israeli military has called up 100,000 reservists in what looks like a major escalation of the conflict.
Hezbollah still has firing capabilities towards Israel. They have stockpiles of missiles, even though it has been significantly hit, both missiles and UAVs. We have struck them and will continue to strike them. Remember that the IDF serves as a buffer between every adversary and Israeli civilians. We are monitoring Hezbollah's conduct and we will strike them.
Let me bring you all the other news from around the region. There'll be more explosions heard in the capitals of Bahrain and Qatar as Iran continues to retaliate. The US Embassy in Kuwait has been closed this morning. The US Embassy in Riyadh was also targeted. Debris from a drone that was brought down caused a fire at an oil facility in the United Arab Emirates. The British government says it is considering sending the warship HMS Duncan to the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper says a charter flight will set off from Oman in the coming days to help British nationals stranded in the Middle East. Around 130,000 British citizens have registered their presence in the region. Israel says it has struck Iran's most important command and control centres during overnight strikes in Tehran. There have been strikes against state television, military airfields and launch sites across the country. Iran's Red Crescent says nearly 800 people have been killed so far. 170 of them are said to be children. Iran's foreign media department released this photograph, which it says shows graves being prepared following the Israeli strike on a school in Minab. Gas price in Europe is up 40% on Friday's prices. And Donald Trump has told The Sun newspaper that the special relationship with the UK is in peril. The president has criticised Sir Keir Starmer's dithering over the use of UK bases. He suggested in the interview the Prime Minister had gone soft and was being guided by his Muslim voters. The Prime Minister suggested yesterday there was no plan and no legal basis for war. Let's take a much closer look at the Israeli military action that is now underway on those positions inside Lebanon. We can bring in the military affairs author and former editor of the Jerusalem Post, Yaakov Katz. Mr. Katz, always good to see you. I was mentioning to our correspondent in the region in the last hour that I know there were outposts left just across the border on the high ground in Lebanon. What is it, do you think, the Israelis are now seeking to do in that southern part below the Litani River?
Well, as we remember, Christian, after the ceasefire went into effect towards the end of last year, Israel decided to keep some positions inside Lebanon. There are 5 forward positions, basically where it has kept troops not too far from the border with Israel, but has kept troops in there to potentially avoid or prevent ground incursions by Hezbollah from the forces that remain in southern Lebanon. That concern has now escalated, obviously, with the renewal of rocket fire by Hezbollah into Israel. Hezbollah's declarations that they stand with Iran and they will also work to help defend the Islamic regime. So Israel's, for now, beefing up forces, getting ready, trying to prevent any action that might happen on the ground. And if this does escalate, have forces that are already on the ground a little deeper that can move even further north if needed to take on Hezbollah on a ground offensive.
Hezbollah is under pressure from two directions currently, obviously from Israel, but also from its own government in Beirut. Desperate to get the economy back on its feet. They distanced themselves yesterday from the rocket fire that went over the border. They are seeking to arrest those they say might have been involved. So how is Hezbollah operating with that sort of control inside Beirut?
Well, this is a real pivotal moment, Christian, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. Hezbollah is weak. Hezbollah is not what it used to be before the war that erupted on October 7th, 2023. It has been significantly weakened by Israel, but it's still there and it does have capabilities, rockets, ground forces, tunnels, etc. Israel struck some of the banks that are used by Hezbollah just the other day. That will make it more difficult for them to pay the salaries of their fighters, to pay the pensions, to pay the stipends to the wounded and the families of their soldiers who have been killed in the wars with Israel. But there's another thing here. The Lebanese government is taking action, not just declarative, but they're saying now they're going to send the Lebanese armed forces to take on and disarm Hezbollah. And I think the reason they can do that is exactly because of the change that we're seeing now in the Middle East. Iran is in decline. That changes the calculus for everyone. The government of Lebanon, which has been held hostage by Hezbollah, now sees a moment, an open door to go through to take on Hezbollah and remove that terrorist organization that has been holding them hostage, a proxy of Iran. So this is, when we look at what's happening in the wider region, this has implications and consequences that can really create so much more stability and peace and security, not just for Israel, but for the entire region.
I've been trying to build for our viewers an intelligence picture of the strike on the Ayatollah on Saturday. We had news yesterday from the Pentagon that there were Tomahawk missiles put on that site first and then the Israeli strikes that went in afterwards. But the stuff I've been reading today is fascinating about the intelligence picture the CIA and the Israelis were building up, not least the footage and the film they've been watching for months from circuit cameras, not only in the compound, but on traffic light cameras running up to the compound. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I mean, Israel, we know, has very extensive intelligence capabilities. We saw how some of that has played out in Iran over the years, whether it was in targeted assassinations of scientists or top IRGC officials. We saw that in the June 12-day war when Israel was able to take out military commanders and top scientists also. But here we see something very interesting. Not only was Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, a head of state, but Israel had been tracking him for a long time. It had been watching him through the traffic cameras in the streets of Tehran. It had somehow managed to hack into them and was able to basically learn, how does he move? How does he navigate? How do the convoys that carry him, where do they go? What routes do they take? And they learned his schedule. And that's always going to be one of the first things you're going to do when you're hunting someone, is you want to understand what their routine is. Where do they go? What are their sites? Where do they potentially have a safe house? Do they go to a bunker somewhere? And once you have that down together, coupled with the human intelligence, the source that the CIA brought Friday and basically led to the understanding that Khamenei was going to be in this compound surrounded by his top officials Saturday morning, that gave the opportunity for Israel and America to launch this really magnificent and significant operation.
You talk about a human source in the singular. If you think back to the conflict in Northern Ireland around the peace negotiations, the IRA was deeply infiltrated at that time, and that had been something that the British government had been doing over decades. Do you think it is similar now in Tehran, that in fact the IRGC and every level of command in Iran has informers and spies within it, such that actually the regime doesn't know who to trust?
Well, it's hard for me to know exactly what Israel has, or the CIA or MI6 for that matter. But what we do know is, I can tell you just what Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the late, who was also killed in the recent strikes, but the former president once said, is that when he was president, they established a counterintelligence agency in Iran. It was meant to, smoke out the spies and the double and who's spying on behalf of Israel from within. And then what turned out was the head of the agency himself was a spy of the Mossad. I don't know if that's true, but that's what Ahmadinejad said. And that idea, that belief by the Iranians creates a deterrent. And that is definitely a feeling that they have. And they should be paranoid because we have seen the capabilities that Israel has and the United States has in penetrating deep into the higher echelons of the political decision-making and the military infrastructure in Iran.
Really interesting detail, which will inform our reporting as we watch the strikes in Tehran and elsewhere in the country. Yaakov Katz, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I told you in our headlines that the US Embassy in Riyadh had been targeted. We've just had an alert issued by the US government in Saudi Arabia saying there is a threat of imminent missile and UAV attacks, drone attacks over Dhahran, close to the US consulate. In their message to US citizens in the area, they say take cover immediately in your residence on the lowest available floor and away from the windows. Do not go outside. The US consulate in Dhahran urges US citizens to shelter in place. If you hear loud explosions or if sirens are activated, immediately seek cover. So another example of the Iranians threatening US interests far and wide across the Gulf region, and increasingly so in Saudi Arabia. Let's go to the border between Israel and Lebanon. We were talking to Yoav Katz a short time ago about the developing situation in Lebanon. John Donison has just reached there. What are you able to see from your viewpoint, John, and what are IDF troops telling you on the ground?
Well, I can tell you what I can see and what I can hear, because just as you're coming to me, we had a huge explosion behind me, sounded like artillery fire, and we've got machine gun fire in the background. You can just about probably pick up. These houses behind me are Metula. It's about as far north as you can get in Israel, small town right on the border with Lebanon. And if you look behind me, you can see the border wall and then a destroyed Lebanese village there, which was destroyed in the year of the war 18 months ago. Well, that is Lebanon. Behind that is where this ground operation is now taking place. The Israelis determined to push Hezbollah back. And the reason they want to do that is because when the war in Gaza started and the threat level from Hezbollah increased, 60,000 Israelis living in towns like Metula and across the north of Israel, well, they had to flee their homes. Loud explosion there right in the background. Not sure exactly what that was. So those 60,000 had to flee their homes for more than a year. And we've heard from ministers today in Israel saying, well, that is not going to be allowed to happen again. And that is why they're trying to push Hezbollah back.
Obviously, in that area, one of the most difficult parts of the operation for Israeli troops has been the tunnelling that Hezbollah have put in place. A lot of that was destroyed, as you say, John, back in 2024. Is there any evidence that the Israelis have presented that Hezbollah is still getting support from Iran, is rebuilding its weapons stockpiles, its launch sites? What do they have?
They've not presented that evidence, and certainly you're right. If you look at this village I mentioned behind me, this Lebanese village, in the past, that was somewhere from where Hezbollah could launch attacks on places like Metula. Well, they clearly can't do that anymore because they've cleared large areas of southern Lebanon. And after that war you mentioned, when the ceasefire came in, Israel didn't fully withdraw. They kept another loud explosion. They took they kept 5 key positions in southern Lebanon. Well, what they're doing is they're expanding that now. And as for Hezbollah's strength, well, they're massively weakened. They're not the organisation they once were. How much they've been able to rebuild their military capability since that war, I just don't know the answer to that. But I think given how ideologically, religiously and financially tied to Iran they are, Iran has funded them to the tune of billions of dollars over the year. It was inevitable they would become involved. And we've now got this war on another front.
I'm presuming, I don't know the geography of where you are, John, but I'm presuming you're near to the blue line. Where are the UNIFIL troops in all this, the UN peacekeepers who were on that border?
Well, they remain in southern Lebanon. And, you know, basically they're meant to be, their role was to enforce a ceasefire, which clearly isn't happening, So, Israel was meant to fully withdraw from southern Lebanon as part of that ceasefire. They haven't done that. They say they haven't done that because Hezbollah hasn't demilitarized the south of Lebanon. So, we had that ceasefire after the war of 2024, but it was an uneasy peace, and to be honest, it was always going to come back.
Well, it sounds extremely lively where you are, John. Do take care. Thank you very much indeed for that. John Donnison there on the border between Lebanon and Israel. We'll take a short break around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.